Hello, friends. It's Nicole, back with your bi-weekly dose of bookstore love. That's not how I do the intro. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Misshelved, your bi-weekly dose of bookstore love. I'm your host, Nicole Brinkley, and I'm here with something a little special for you today. Back in the height of the first year of the pandemic, probably August 2020, I decided that I wanted to make a podcast. I wanted to call it Misshelved, and I wanted it to be authors and independent booksellers in conversation with each other. But in order to make sure that format worked, I needed to do a test episode. And rather than suck another independent bookseller into it, I thought, hey, I'm an independent bookseller. I have an author I love to talk to. Why don't I make that the test episode? That way I can save it, practice editing it, see if I like the format, and it gives me something to share when I pitch this idea to other independent booksellers and authors. Luckily, one of my very best friends is Ashley Poston. She is the author of a lot of things. You'll hear her plug them at the beginning of the episode. But most importantly now, she has a wonderful romance novel coming out in July 2022 called The Dead Romantics. It is an ode to loving books and the book world. And if you love romance novels, you have to check it out. Ash sat down in conversation with me in August 2020 to record this test episode. So some of the things are a little outdated now. You'll hear us talking about new books that are not new. But it is a wonderful episode, and I had so much fun recording it with her. Since we're on a little bit of a hiatus between seasons 2 and 3, season 3 of Misshelved will be back at the end of January, I thought I'd drop this in for you to give you all something to listen to. If you like it, maybe Ash and I can do another episode closer to when Dead Romantics comes out at the end of season 3. Let us know. Hit us up on the Twitter and the Instagram. Holler at us. In the meantime, settle in. Everything you're about to listen to is exactly what went out to all of the season 1 participants before the show ever aired. So it is the test music before I had the original music you hear at the beginning of the episode. It is Nicole learning how to edit, and it actually sounds pretty good for my first editing before we had our wonderful technical editor. And it's just a whole lot of fun. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy this piece of bonus content. And happy reading. Hello, and welcome to Misshelved, the podcast that lets book lovers listen in as independent booksellers chat with their favorite authors. I'm your host, Nicole Brinkley, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guests. The first is author Ashley Poston.
Hi, I'm Ashley Poston, the author of Geekarella, Princess and the Fangirl, Bookish and the Beast, Heart of Iron, Soul of Stars, and Among the Beasts and Briars, coming October 20th. That's a mouthful.
Her partner in crime for today's episode is me, actually, Nicole. I'm the manager at Oblong Books, the creator of Misshelved, and the general wearer of all hats. This is a test episode. I'll be shocked if this ever gets released to the public, but hey, we gotta start somewhere, right? Settle in as Ashley and I talk about the power of weird books, our love of HOWL'S Moving Castle, and the idea that any book can find its audience. Ash.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you love HOWL'S Moving Castle.
I do?
You do?
I do! I do.
And I've been thinking about HOWL'S Moving Castle a lot lately in the context of what I want to call the unmarketability problem. It's the idea that books are too weird to find an audience. And HOWL'S Moving Castle, as a book, doesn't make sense in a modern publishing world.
It doesn't make sense at all. It's like not middle grade, it's not YA, it's not adult, it's like everything all in one.
The closest thing I've seen from it in modern publishing is maybe The House in the Cerulean Sea. And even then, that is distinctly adult characters doing adult things with a lot of kids and warm-hearted whimsy.
Yeah, I would argue that they wouldn't be in the same genre if like they were published at the exact same time. Because the feel to Cerulean Sea is so different than Howl's Moving Castle. They're both warm, but like Cerulean like deals a lot more with office bureaucratics and stuff, while Howl's Moving Castle is just that.
There's no moment where the main characters of The House in the Cerulean Sea turn into a puddle of slime.
No. And they also don't put on 7-league boots and go after their stupid wizard.
No, and they also don't magically transport themselves inexplicably to Scotland.
It's Wales.
Wales, you're right.
Wales. It's Wales, and he's a rugby player.
I forgot that he's a rugby player.
And he's getting his master's in English lit.
So the reason I wanted to bring up Howl's Moving Castle and Unmarketability, besides the obvious, it doesn't fit into clear-cut publishing markets by today's standards, is nobody really knows where to shelve Howl's Moving Castle. For some reason at our store, we keep it in middle grade.
Why?
But it's definitely... I know!
Nobody talks about sex!
I know. I think I need to move it to adult. But I wasn't the one who put it in middle grade. And I think people, when they think of Diana Wynne Jones, assume that because her work is so accessible and so whimsical, that it must be middle grade.
Oh, I would argue that most of her work is definitely adult. There's only a handful of books that are like wholeheartedly middle grade, and Dog's Body is one of them, and I love Dog's Body to death.
Where do you think the disconnect comes with publishers? Because we don't see books like this now. We don't see books that transcend age categories or genres nearly as often as we used to, I feel like.
It's really weird. I would say publishers, at least today, they concentrate a lot more on what age are these people? What's the writing style like? Because Diana Wynne Jones always wrote very simply. I mean, she was a very straightforward writer. She knew what she was writing. She was going for it. And somehow it ended up making sense because she just knew everything from the beginning. I think that's where the disconnect lies, because if I wrote an adult novel with a 15-year-old protagonist, like people will argue that, oh, it's a YA because it's a 15-year-old protagonist.
But having a teenage protagonist doesn't necessarily make something adult. There's so many other things that make it young adult or adult.
Yes. That includes voice and like the theme of the books, and like the theme of Howl's Moving Castle is a lot more adult than I think people give it credit for, because it's not about going to save a country or finding out where you fit in the world. It's about like a sisterly bond and like finding out where you fit inside your family, which is a very middle grade but also a very adult concept. When you grow up out of your teenage years, like you still have to figure out where you fit in and where you fit in with the dynamics of your ever-changing family. And I don't think that is strictly a middle grade theme.
There's a lot of pressure within the book on Sophie to figure out where she fits in with her sisters and how much she's willing to sacrifice for her sisters as well, and how much they're willing to sacrifice for each other. And that in and of itself definitely feels more adult than YA or middle grade.
Yes, very much so. And also just the relations between her and her sisters. They're all growing up and they're all figuring out where they are, like where they're supposed to be in the world, while also figuring out how they can still support each other while they're going out and chasing their dreams. And I think that's something that a lot of, especially early 20s to like late 20s, they can all kind of relate to, because we're all trying to figure out where we fit in, and it's just really hard to like find out where you fit in and then also still have that connection with your family and how to best support them.
So I wanted to read you a quote that I saw from Charmaine Lovegrove, who's the publisher of Dialogue Books. This was at the beginning of a shelf awareness newsletter a little while ago, and I saved it knowing that we would be talking about this because I think it I think it leads into the idea of why Diana Wynne Jones would have a difficult time publishing now, but also why we're seeing from publishers kind of the same stories regurgitated a lot, and how much rarer it is to see something more original break out. So this is what Charmaine Lovegrove said. I've been shocked at the disconnect between publishers and bookshops. If more people in publishing had worked in bookshops, it would radically change what stories are told. Seeing unexpected pairings of readers and books quickly dispels the idea of who reads what, why, how, and when. Once the assumptions are gone, it opens up many different narratives to the widest range of readers. In Germany, you need to do 7 years apprenticeship to become a bookseller. I believe you must spend a year serving customers and readers by working in a bookshop and a library before you get a job in a publishing house. We should no longer be allowed to stipulate who the reader is unless we have experience of them directly. It's a great quote.
It really is. That's a fantastic quote.
And it got me thinking about when I, as a bookseller, talk to publisher reps and they go, oh, this book is really weird, but you might like it. And it becomes my favorite book of the year. And I think we saw this in a broader way happen recently with the success of Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth.
I knew you were going to say those books.
Hey, you mean I'm finding a way to slip Gideon the Ninth into a casual conversation?
Of course
Shocking.
you are.
Gideon the Ninth is a book that it would definitely have always found its audience, but on a massive scale, by all traditional publishing standards, shouldn't have worked. It's lesbian necromancers in space with more meme references than maybe plot. There's a lot of plot in that book, but there might be more memes.
I remember all of the meme jokes, none of the plot. It's like Gideon herself, just there but no brain. Just
head empty, all meme.
Exactly, that's it. Head empty, all meme.
But Harrow the Ninth ended up hitting the New York Times bestseller list, which is baffling by traditional publishing standards.
Mm-hmm.
But every single person who read that book is obsessed with it in the very same way that I see people obsessed with, for instance, Howl's Moving Castle and Diana Wynne Jones and all these other books that don't fit these specific niches, that don't fit what we view as traditionally successful or easily categorizable. So what do you think draws people to books like this, and how do you think they become successful both within traditional publishing? Like, how do we fight that uphill battle, but also on a broader spectrum? Why do these books connect so well with people?
I would argue that a lot of people are really tired of the westernized 3-act narrative. Because Howl's Moving Castle does not have one whatsoever. It's a bunch of small moments just clumped together to make one big moment. And also that's why people like Twilight too. There's not a 3-act structure in Twilight. People tried to make it a 3-act structure, but good luck. And the same can be said for Gideon too. It's not a 3-act structure. You can say the beginning is up until they get to the mausoleum house, whatever, and then the ending is like the big fight, but then that leaves 300 pages in the middle.
Gideon the Ninth is a space opera that hid a whole separate murder mystery book inside of it.
Yes.
And I still don't know how it managed to do that.
If you try to track it as a 3-act narrative, it will be very sloppy. Trust me, I've tried. And I think that's why a lot of people are gravitating towards the quote weirder books, is because we're all tired of the structure of the westernized narrative. I mean, the same people who like the weirder books are probably going to be the same people who gravitate towards manga and anime and a lot of Eastern narratives, because they don't have the 3-act structure usually. It's more new to us than the 3 or 7-act structure. So I think that's a lot of it, is that we're just tired of the same old, and having stories that have a bunch of little moments instead of 3 big moments gives the readers a chance to experience more of the story, I feel. The 3-act structure feels like you're always rushing to the next big part. Whereas Miyazaki's earlier work, My Neighbor Totoro, critics, when it came out, Western critics said, oh, this is boring. There's no real plot to it. It's just a bunch of little moments. But that's what a lot of the viewership really loved about it, was that it was a bunch of little moments, because we as readers, we don't always want just one big overarching narrative. We want more stories that reflect our lives. and how we know stories in the present. So yeah, that's what I think.
I know that in the height of my YA reading, when I first began, I loved stories about kings and queens and princesses and all of like the tropes that we see the most of. And the more I read, the more I was seeking out books that also focused on non-traditional characters or non-traditional narratives, at least within the Western canon. Quieter books that were about, say, gardeners' daughters.
Or painters.
Or painters. And I think part of why people snatch the books up so quickly that have those quieter characters or those quieter narrators is because maybe the market is so indurated with royalty retellings and big wars and all these same regurgitations, at least in genre fiction, of things that we've seen over and over and over again.
Oh, it's not like a you feel. It's definitely like oversaturated in both adult and YA. It's just fantasy is like this princess or this prince, or I'm like, where's my broody wizards at? I just want one more broody wizard. That's all I want.
I remember in the past year, the sudden burst of books that had been finished that were clearly inspired by Daenerys Targaryen that are now sitting in the YA shelves.
Yeah.
I love me a dragon girl, but we maybe have one too many now.
We might have so many, which, I mean, I love the fact that readers have so many choices. It's great. If they don't like one dragon girl, they can go to another dragon girl.
I think in terms of oversaturated markets, that's also why, in addition to the fact that it is much needed, we're seeing diverse books by diverse authors do so well right now. Both because they've been denied a place in the canon that they so richly deserved for so long, but also because we've seen white men write the same books for 100 years now, and please God, give me something different.
When I say the market is oversaturated, I mean by white authors writing the exact same tropes. And as a fellow white author, I'm like, I cannot do this trope this one time. And like, let someone else, please, someone who isn't white take the reins. I wouldn't mind seeing a lot more fantasy and sci-fi from diverse authors. One, it's needed, but two, it would also alleviate the problems we're having with all the stories being the exact same.
I think that's also why I'm so in love with Tor.com right now, because their lineup is so queer and diverse, and there's so many incredible authors of color writing for them. But because of their format, because almost all of their books are novellas, with the exception of weird genre combining books like Gideon the Ninth, the format is inherently different as well. Not only do you not have the traditional 3-act structure or the traditional hero's journey, but then you're also getting it from voices that we don't traditionally hear, and the combination has made for amazing literature.
It really has.
With Tor.com in mind, I wanted to know, what do you think that we as readers and as publishers and as booksellers could be doing more to find those weird books and connect them with the people who are going to love them?
Well, I would definitely say put more money behind weird books. I mean, that's like the durr moment, but put more money behind the books you think are just a little too weird, because those are usually the books that people are going to be looking for. Because while we are all like creatures of habit, sometimes we want to break that habit just a little bit.
And we
find
should break
something
those
new.
habits.
Yeah, exactly. Recently, because I've been so kind of tired of adult fantasy, I'm like, well, let's try adult fantasy that's been translated from other languages. So I'm currently reading A Winter's Promise. It's of the Mirror Visitor Quartet, I think. It is so freaking good. And I can't find a 3-act structure. I'm just like, oh, this is just a bunch of little things happening. And like the main plot throughout this entire book is basically the love-hate relationship between two people. And I'm like, yes, please give me more of this. I want more of this.
That's one that my coworkers have compared to the Golden Compass series. And I was like, maybe a little?
I I would compare it more to something that, as I said, Diana Wynne Jones, something that Diana Wynne Jones would write. Not Howl's Moving Castle, but something very close to it, because it deals, like the Golden Compass, with jumping to different areas. And the world building is fantastic, but the characters they're just strange enough that they don't really fall under the Golden Compass sort of like archetypes, if that makes sense.
It does. So we should throw more money behind weirder, nichier books, especially those by diverse authors. And I think from a bookseller standpoint, one of the things I feel is most important is that we take chances on reading those books, even if they're outside the traditional sphere of what we might consider our genres.
Yes.
Right? How are we supposed to become better writers or better publishers or better sales reps or better readers if we're not willing to try new things?
Yeah, and I think part of the reader spirit is being adventurous. And so if you are really adventurous, then you should charge ahead and like go and find and like seek out these weird and strange stories. I think we all need to like open our mind a little more to books that might seem a little bit weird, but like those are always like the best though. They're like treasure troves of new things that you didn't think you wanted until you started reading it.
What we're saying is the next time you walk into an independent bookstore and you see a shelf talker for a really weird book, don't dismiss it right away. Go, maybe I'd like that too, and give it a go.
Yeah, just like stand there and read the first few pages. If like you don't like first person present tense and it's in first person present, then please just put it back. Same with third person present, Nicole.
Yeah, you're throwing me under the bus already, huh?
Oh, 100%.
Look, some of us just can't read third-person present tense, especially in historical novels, and that's okay.
Yes, it's absolutely okay, and it just means the book is not for you, but it doesn't mean it's a bad book. It just means it's not for you.
And I think that's something publishers need to get over, too, is the idea that just because they don't immediately connect with something doesn't mean it's bad. It just might mean that that person in the acquisitions team or that sales rep who's looking at it isn't the intended reader.
And probably isn't the person who should be working on that book.
Mm-hmm. This is a secret plea to please give us more queer editors of color and more queer sales reps and more publicists of color. Please just hire and pay more marginalized people to do awesome work.
Please, 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 please. That goes back to the quote you read too of everyone in publishing having like a year of book selling experience. That's also like that's a privilege to be able to work in a bookstore, and not a lot of people, especially people of color, have that sort of privilege, especially in places that don't have bookstores. Like there's not a lot of bookstores around here in South Carolina. So maybe there's another way besides like working in a bookstore, but maybe just working with books on a seller level.
I wish there were more digital, almost internships for booksellers, the same way that there can be for publishers, because it's getting better at an incremental pace, but bookselling is still so painfully white, especially in my region. I live in New England, which is wonderful, but also one of the whitest places in the world.
Oh, yeah.
And it's true, we are as white as our snow. And we need to be doing better in that regard, not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but because by not diversifying our booksellers, we are doing a disservice to our customers and also to the books that we're trying to hand sell. There are so many incredible books out there and so many customers that want to find those books, but don't necessarily feel comfortable when they walk into a bookstore and see only white faces staring back at them, especially when those white booksellers are not thinking as critically as they could be about what they're reading and end up reading only white authors.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. I definitely think booksellers and even like librarians too need to diversify their reading list. As a former librarian, just caveat there. So.
You're like, I've been there. I know how it is.
Yeah, it's like, been there, done that.
What are some weird kind of genre bending books besides Howl's Moving Castle that you would recommend? Manga is acceptable here.
Yes, okay. I got this now. All right. I wholeheartedly recommend Fushigi Yugi. I forgot who the mangaka is, but it is a portal fantasy. And it is one of the coolest ones I've ever read because it's not contemporary, it's not really fantasy, it's not really Western or Eastern fantasy. It's like its own blend of it, like by itself. But also it's a murder mystery and it's also a villain story. Like it's just
there's so a little bit of everything.
There's so many things rolled into one. It's so good. I like what it does. Like, just trigger warning: there is a scene that's an almost sexual assault, so that is a thing. And also, I really enjoy Inuyasha by Rumiko Takahashi. Like, it's also a portal fantasy around the same time as Fushigi Yugi, but very different, very Eastern fantasy with yokai and feudal Japan and demons and stuff. And it's very good. It's also a mystery.
I was reflecting on what my choices would be, and I've realized I have a horrible trend of loving fantasies that have murder mystery shoved in the middle of them.
Yep.
Because that's Gideon the Ninth, but I was reflecting on the Wayward Children series and the first book, Every Heart a Doorway, and that's literally just a fantasy murder mystery, and I was like, maybe I have a thing.
I was also going to say that one, too, the Every Heart a Doorway series. Oh, gosh, so good.
They're so good.
I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. It doesn't really help because my bookshelf is turned away from me, so I don't see any of the books on it.
One of the things I think, and I wish more people would read them outside of the targeted age demographic, is kids' graphic novels break genre expectations a lot and blend genres in really creative ways and break from traditional storytelling.
Scullion by David Green.
I was going to say Scullion is a great example. My favorite graphic novel of the year is probably Snapdragon by Kat Lay.
Yes.
So good. And these are both stories that take traditional fantasy tropes and play with them in new and interesting ways.
I think you'll find more of that in graphic novels, especially like comics and graphic novels, because like they're not really adherent to the 3X structure. They don't have to be. They're allowed to be a little loosey-goosey with things.
They're not bound to the same expectations from their publishers that I think traditional book publishers place on traditional novels in terms of like marketability ideas, because comics and graphic novels have always been weird, whereas books traditionally less so unless you know where to look. I want to give you a chance before we wrap up to give your spiel about why the Howl's Moving Castle book is better than the Howl's Moving Castle movie, if you so desire.
Oh, okay. I have been waiting for this my entire life. This is my moment. So, the movie, Howl's Moving Castle. While I love Hayao Miyazaki a whole great deal, he basically just cherry-picked the characters and he put them into a different scenario that has nothing to do with the characters or their story arcs or why they're in their predicament to begin with. I mean, he took basically the soul of Howl's Moving Castle, the book, and he's like, nah, let's not do it. Let's put it in a war allegory instead. And there's no war in the books. It's mentioned like once in literally one sentence. Literally, it's one sentence like, oh, there's a war happening. And he looked at that one sentence like, yes, that's my plot. And anyway, Howl's Moving Castle, the book, is about the eldest Hatter sister going out and seeking her fortune, and her fortune just happens to be a wizard named Howl. And for the next 200 pages, she just makes his life a living hell because he's a tool, and she somehow still loves him for it. And it's amazing.
The book is so much softer than the movie is.
Just like, Howl's Moving Castle is so much softer in the book than it is the movie. Like, the movie is like hard and bombs and explosions and everything is terrible. And the book is like, oh, Sophie is going to mend Howl's suits and accidentally put a curse on it to attract every stray woman to hit on him or like to grow exponentially long. And it's so great because in the books, like, okay, this book has been out for like over 20 years, so I can spoil it. In the book, Sophie has magical powers that she doesn't even know about, and so like half the book is her figuring out, oh my god, I'm a witch. And it's just so good. And then she's trying to disrupt a romance between Michael and her sister, but she thinks her sister is dating Howl, and oh my, I can't. It's like, it's the best 90s like fantasy rom-com you could ever ask for. And also, Hal is a rugby player who often like stumbles into the castle drunk.
And the beautiful thing about the books is you're right in that it's a rom-com, but it's also this exploration of found family and found power.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the movies are just allegories for war that don't exist in the original text.
The thing is like, Hayao Miyazaki didn't need to make Howl a physical monster. Like, in the books, like, you can tell he's kind of terrible. But the point of his character arc is being less terrible, and he becomes less terrible by caring about other people. The crux of Howl's Moving Castle is that you gotta care about other people. Empathy is not a weakness. And that's, I think, something that was kind of lost in the movie.
And I think that's something that is now lost in traditional publishing. Those softer stories, those stories that have empathy at the core of them, aren't worse. They're the stories that we need now more than ever.
I also agree that a lot of current narratives are very self-centered, not in like a selfish sort of way, but it's about like the character and only the character and not about the community around the character.
Which is why I think, from an earlier call out, that The House of the Cerulean Sea has also done so well, because that is a book about your place within a community and within making the world better.
Exactly. And like, these books always turn out to be so happy and warm because we're humans. We want the best for other people, and we want other people to want the best for us. And just reading about that, like, I think it reminds us of our humanity a little bit.
And humanity is what we need to be reminded of, and that's what weird, niche stories remind us of. All right. I think we need to wrap it up. Ash, where can people find you on the internet?
On the internet, people can find me crying in a corner. No, wait, sorry. People can find me on Twitter at Ash Poston and on Instagram at _Ash Poston because it's still sitting on my name. It's fine. I'm fine. I love the underscore. And also, you can find me at www.ashposton.com, or if you're a TikToker, you can find me on Not Ash Poston.
And you can find me online on Instagram at NE Brinkley. And you can support Ash by buying her books at my bookstore, Oblong Books. Just go to oblongbooks.com and type Ashley Poston in the search bar and then buy all of her stuff. Among the Beasts and Briars is one of my favorites of hers. And if you haven't read it already, The Princess and the Fangirl is so good. I know Books and the Beast is more recently published, but I'm still not over my love of Jess.
Oh, thank you. And I also cannot wait for Among the Beasts and Briars. It's going to be so good. I'm very excited.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Bye!
Bye! If you liked today's episode, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and tell a friend about Misshelved. To keep up to date with all of our bookish hijinks, follow us at Misshelved Pod on Twitter and Instagram. If you really like what happens here, and we hope you do, head over to our Patreon page to help fund this podcast and our Misshelved newsletter. Thank you for listening, and as always, happy reading.